Hi, and welcome to Human Computer Interaction. I'm your professor, Dr. English Dowdell. We're talking about social media in the workplace. So let me start with a quick question for you. How many of you have checked social media today before watching this video? Now be honest, even just a quick scroll. Now here's the follow-up question. How many of you think social media belongs in the workplace? Now, that question is exactly what this module is about because the answer is not yes or no. It depends on how it's being used. In this lecture, we're focusing on how social media operates in professional environments, not just personally, but organizationally. Now, by the end of this lecture, you should be able to distinguish the benefits and risks of workplace social media, analyze how social media impacts professional communication, and then evaluate how organizations create boundaries and policies around social media use. Now, unlike the previous module lectures, today we're going to dive a little deeper with real-world examples so that you can clearly see how this plays out. Now, when we say social media in the workplace, we're talking about two main things. One is external use, and this is how organizations communicate with the public. And then there's internal use, and this is how employees use social media while they're working. Now, in your reading for this week, it defines a social media as platforms where users create and share content and engage with others. And that includes platforms like Instagram and TikTok, LinkedIn, X, and Facebook. But in the workplace context, these platforms are no longer just social, they become strategic tools. Okay, let's start with some positives because there's a lot of them. Okay, one is direct communication with customers. Now, one of the big advantages is direct access to your audience. Think about a company like Nike. Okay, when they post on Instagram, they get customer comments. Nike will respond, and conversation happens in real time. And that's something traditional advertising never allowed. Now, why does this matter? Because it builds trust, okay? It creates relationships and it provides that immediate feedback. The second benefit is brand awareness and visibility. Now, social media massively expands reach. For example, a small business posts a TikTok video. It goes viral, and now millions of people know about that brand. Now, this is what your reading refers to as viral content, rapid exposure across large audiences. Now, the key takeaway for that is, social media can turn unknown brands into major players overnight. The third benefit is recruitment and hiring. Companies, they also use social media for hiring. Okay, LinkedIn is basically built for this. Organizations, what they'll do is they'll post jobs, they'll search candidates, and they'll evaluate profiles. And this makes hiring faster and a lot more targeted. The fourth benefit is customer service. Now, many companies, they now handle customer service through social media. Okay, like airlines like Delta Airlines, they respond to complaints on Twitter. Okay, instead of calling a hotline, customers would tweet and then they'll get a response within minutes. That's a major shift in communication. And the last benefit that we'll talk about is cost effective marketing. Compared to like traditional advertising, social media is cheap. You can run an ad for a few dollars, you can target specific audiences, and you can track performance instantly. That's incredibly powerful, from a business perspective. So at this point, social media sounds amazing, right? But here's the reality. Every benefit comes with the trade-off. So now let's talk about some of the risks. Okay, one is employee distraction. Okay, let's be honest. Social media is designed to be addictive. Now, in your reading for this week, it points out that it can distract employees from their work. An employee checks Instagram for a second, and then 20 minutes later, they're still scrolling. Okay, multiply that across a company, and productivity drops. The second risk is reputation damage. One mistake on social media can go viral for the wrong reasons. One example is United Airlines had a viral incident involving a passenger being removed from a flight. Now, the situation itself was bad, but social media amplified it globally within hours. Social media, it doesn't just share information, it accelerates it. The third risk is that of security. Social media increases exposure to cybersecurity threats. So some examples could include like phishing links, account hacking, even data links. If an employee clicks the wrong link, it can compromise an entire system. The fourth one is the misuse of company accounts. Now, I want you to imagine this scenario. A company's social media manager accidentally posts something inappropriate, or worse, posts from the wrong account. Now, this happens more than you think. And the results? Public embarrassment, loss of trust, and sometimes even legal consequences. And the last risk we'll talk about is public criticism and exploitation. Now, social media gives everyone a voice, including critics. Now, in your reading, it highlights risks like false reviews or attacks. So, an example of this would be like a single negative post can really kind of gain traction. It can influence public perception, and it can even damage a brand's reputation, even if the claim isn't fully accurate. Okay, so now let's shift to something more subtle, but just as important. Okay, this is how social media changes how we communicate professionally. So, one is let's talk about like informality versus professionalism. Okay, social media encourages casual communication, but in a workplace, professionalism still matters. So let's think about it this way. Let's compare a TikTok caption and a formal email. They're very different tones, right? Organizations, they have to balance. They have to, being relatable, but still staying professional. The second is speed of communication. Social media is fast. Okay, people expect responses quickly. Okay, and this creates pressure on organizations to monitor the platforms constantly and to respond in real time. And that changes expectation for communications. And then third, public versus private communication. Now, this is a big one. Okay, in traditional workplaces, communication was private. Now, conversations happen in public comment sections. This means every response represents the brand. Okay, mistakes are visible to everybody. So, how do organizations deal with all of this? They create social media policies. Now, what do these policies include? Well, most companies will define when employees can use social media, what they can post, who manages official accounts, and how to respond to customers. Now, these policies exist to reduce risk while still allowing benefits. So, let's say you work for a company, okay? Can you post about your job? Can you complain about your boss? Can you share internal information? Policies will answer these questions. Okay, now everything we've discussed directly connects to your assignment if you're watching this for my course. In the milestone for external communications assignment, what you're doing is you're analyzing how an organization uses social media. So you'll need to identify which platforms they use, their purpose, whether it's marketing, support, or branding, benefits of their approach, any risk and challenges, and then how their design and communication affects perception. Now, when you're working on this, I want you to ask yourself, are they using social media strategically or are they just posting randomly? Now, for the team's activity for this module, which is social media brand analysis, this is where you're going to apply everything in a hands-on way. So you'll choose a brand, you'll analyze their posts, you'll look at interaction with users, and then you'll evaluate design choices and engagement strategies. So here's what I want you to really focus on. Okay, don't just describe what they're doing. Okay, explain why it works or why it doesn't work. For example, why does a post get engagement? What design elements attract attention? And what risks do you see? Okay, that's it for this lecture, and I'll leave you with this idea. Okay, social media is one of the most powerful communication tools organizations have, but it's also one of the easiest to misuse. Now, the difference between success and failure often comes down to strategy, awareness, and good decision making. And that's what you're learning to evaluate in this module.